So we just wanted to comment with respect to the press conference relative to prioritized progress. I think we all agree infrastructure is a must, but I think it speaks to the tone deafness that the governor's office has had relative to those people who have come out in significant numbers to say that tolls is not needed in Connecticut. But a couple of things that we heard today was, one, there is no plan. There is no idea of how much they're going to charge, who they're going to charge, what the rate is per mile, what they're going to do for out-of-staters, in-staters, trucks, et cetera. There is no plan. And what you also heard is that their preference is to pass a bill to give them absolute authority to do a toll, and then let the bureaucrats determine how our constituency is going to get priced. We're going to have no part of it. They are going to determine how much they're going to charge without one legislator weighing in. How disrespectful could you be to the people of the state of Connecticut by saying, give us the authority and then we'll tell you how much? And there isn't a darn thing you could do about it. That is simply outrageous. Outrageous. This should have pure transparency. If it goes through, at the very least, have the courage and the respect for the people of the state of Connecticut and bring forth a plan that shows a formula and allows people to vote who represent the people who are going to be taxed. This is crazy. Crazy way of doing it. And what you saw was a full endorsement. And the reason is because they know when the real numbers come out and the real hard study is done, this fictitious model they have on the back here is nothing but a cartoon sketch at best. Secondly, you heard them talk about borrowing. The truth of the matter is we're under our cap. The governor suggested we may not be. He didn't know, so let's clarify the record. We are under our cap. That's number one. Number two is he doesn't like our borrowing, but he likes his borrowing, because what he said was that he's going to take that toll money and leverage it for dollars. So he's going to borrow. Now it's just a question of which borrowing plan makes sense, not that we're not going to borrow. So I think there are other people who want to speak besides me on this. Also, I object to the notion. Obviously, those folks who said we're not bonding for clean water funds haven't read our prioritized progress. We are. Those people who said we're not borrowing for school construction haven't read our prioritized progress. We are. Those people who said we're not bonding for LoSiP. We are. Town Road Aid. We are. You know why? Because they haven't read the document. They're sticking to talking points that were created 2 years ago that they haven't read the document, and it's the same talking point. Knowledge is power, and sometimes knowledge could be scary. So you ignore it, you don't have to deal with the reality of the argument for which you face. All you do is go to simple talking points. That, to me, is an embarrassment to this institution. That is a falsehood to say we're not borrowing for these items under our geo bonding, which is what we have in place. The governor talked about the partnership, private-public partnership, the three-point partnership. Fails to mention it was the Democrats who said no, and in GAE destroyed any hopes of that bill being of any value to the governor. So he's boxing himself in. We have no knowledge of a plan. And this is just a desperate attempt to try to get a toll plan which has failed, which is going to fail this state and failed in the way it's rolled out, back on track, and simply doesn't do it. Vinny?
I think Senator Fasano said it best. You know, the legislature isn't fooled. The Republicans in the legislature are not fooled by this proposal. And the problem is now neither is the public. When you go out, the public is scared, they're concerned. They don't know what level of taxation is going to occur now just getting into your vehicle to drive to work. And that impacts our middle class, along with so many other budget proposals that Governor Lamont has put forth. And so that fear is real, and the public is coming back, pushing back on this plan. And unfortunately, what we saw here today is an attempt of Governor Lamont and some of the legislative Democrats to come forward and continue to peddle something that has no specifics, as Senator Fasano pointed out. We don't know the level of tolling. We don't know the number of tolling, but we're told to accept it and jam it down the state of Connecticut's throats. And I'd like to give Laura Devlin a few words as well.
Thank you. So we just heard the governor say that, he wants to gain the trust of taxpayers in Connecticut. Yet this is the same governor that 2 months being in office raided the Special Transportation Fund by freezing the GO bonds that were allocated and this car tax that was also allocated through the bipartisan budget. We just heard that there really is no plan, but whatever that plan turns out to be, the legislature won't have any part of it. And it was a total mischaracterization of the prioritized progress plan. And that's why we are getting hundreds of people each night to come to the informational toll forums that Senator Martin and I are holding across the state. Because the residents of Connecticut have had it. And they want the straight story, the straight facts, and that's what we're providing them. We can do better. Our state deserves a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you. Listen, our plan is on the table. We're showing it to you. Today, I didn't see their plan. You guys started to ask some pretty serious questions and started to get into the weeds a little bit, and I saw them close up this shop pretty quickly. So I would suggest to you to go dig some more and go ask some pointed questions to them.
Any questions?
Is there any plan, however detailed it would be, that would cause any of you standing here to seriously consider tolling in any way, shape, form, or price point?
It's an open-ended question. Look, I believe that all ideas should be brought to a table, no matter what the ideas are. And we have looked at this tolling going back to the 2009 first tolling study done in the state of Connecticut. I've read every single report, and I know everybody else has behind me, right up through. And as I said, the last press conference, we're going to be issuing a statement relative to the Smith report, which we're finalizing, we'll be issuing tomorrow. But the numbers don't work. And you can't, they keep on saying Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a different set of rules that they abide by. New York has a different set of rules that they abide by. Rhode Island has a different set of rules that they abide by, because we are a unique state with the 1983 agreement. We're very limited of what we can and cannot do, and that was done intentionally by that agreement. So if they submit a plan, I'd be happy to review it, but I haven't seen anything that says it's viable and it works. The underlying fear is the tax monster, which is the toll tax monster. That still, sends goosebumps when I hear them talk about it, because you see what he's already done, which is to move the transportation funds coming from other sources out.
But when you say viable,
Yep.
now there's an open question as to whether or not what they're talking about will produce the numbers that they hope to get. But the Federal Highway Administration has been very clear that it is permissible for Connecticut to go forward with some form of congestion tolling. So the question is, will it produce 800 million, 600 million, so forth. But the point of my first question was, there is a sense that tolls are a great wedge issue for the Republicans 2 years out, and that there's no way you're going to have a serious discussion about tolls in any form. And I haven't heard anything here. Go ahead.
So let me reject a couple of things. First of all, how did Connecticut end up in tolls? The reason why Connecticut ended up in tolls is several years ago, Commissioner Rediker, under Governor Malloy, applied for a VPP, which is value pricing pilot program, and several slots were given out. Connecticut got one of the slots, and then they have a time period in which they have to enact their tolling plan with the approval of feds that has to be congestion. That's how we are where we are. With respect to saying this is a wedge issue, I want to also be clear that when tolls was just a mirage 5 years ago, the Republicans had prioritized progress on the table 5 years ago. Before tolling became known in this building, had any legs in this building, we said, let's get the STF going by prioritized progress. But because it was a Republican idea, no one paid attention to it. And the only way we got it in our budget 2 years ago is we were 18-18 in the Senate and close in the House. But we started this conversation long before tolls ever had any way. So it wasn't like they went out and did tolls and we said, what can we do as a political wedge issue that's hurtful to us who worked years on this? What we said was, how are we going to move Connecticut forward? What's the best way of changing this transportation fund, which was going broke when we were looking at it 5 years ago? We saw that it wasn't the sale of gasoline that was going down. It was the cost of gasoline that was going down, the wholesale cost. That's the reason why our money was being lost. And then you had bonding going up. The governor was doing the ramp up. The question is, to us, how do you solve that problem? We came up with, collectively, House and Senate, prioritized progress. That's how we ended up here. It wasn't a wedge issue. So we felt we had the right issue at the time. Now they brought on tolls for whatever reason they wanted to bring on tolls. We looked at that open-eyed and said, does that work? And the answer was no. The answer was, our project brings money today to the table and now, and $72 billion in 30 years. That's how we got here. I just want to be clear. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. Got all those words mixed up. Knee-jerk reaction to their toll. It was a thought-out process before tolls ever was really talked about in this building.
On these numbers, Len, you
4 years?
said this was
Oh, that's right, because your daughter's 4 years old. 4 years old. That's what it is.
you said
That was the birthday present.
you said you want to go? No. You said these numbers are a cartoon sketch. Take me through this. Are you saying, what is the cartoon sketch? I mean, they're talking about here 3.5 cents a mile, 4.5 cents a mile on the peak period. Are you saying that that's just wrong or it's not doable? What
The
is
reason why it's a
bogus
cartoon
about it?
sketch is that nobody knows. And they would admit to you in a private conversation that nobody knows. If you would talk to them and say, how did you get this? Here's how you could do it just 30,000 foot level. These are the numbers that Governor Malloy came up with when he told every highway, 9, Route 2, Route 15, Route 8, every major interstate and interstate highway system, told everything. He came up with those numbers. How you got them is in the
The numbers per mile, is that what you mean?
numbers
by
per
that?
mile.
Okay.
That came out of the C.D. Smith report. And if you look at C.D.C. Smith report, they say this is for conversation only. Don't hold these numbers. We don't know if they're right. Now, Governor Lamont says, I'm narrowing it down. I'm not going to do Route 8. I'm not going to do these other highways. So therefore, you're doing less. It's 300 miles, less road you're tolling. How do you end up with the same number? There are less cars.
Well, actually, it's a lesser number when you look at the DOT report from November. But, I mean, that's another issue.
So if it's less cars, the value must go down. And you're coming from a number that you began with that the expert says is not a real number. It is for discussion only. He admitted to you that essentially by not answering your question specifically, he can't commit to these numbers. This is a ruse.
You know, today also we heard 50 gantries. It was 53. Originally it was 82. The measle map isn't a made-up map. We spent millions and millions of dollars in that study to get that map, of which there was a lot of thought and rigor that was put into it. So regardless the number of gantries and regardless the promised discounts to Connecticut residents, the $1 billion gross net revenue never goes away. So you have to ask, sale on what? It's all a myth.
You have the capacity right now, if Republicans come to the table and say, we will consider tolling, but the only way we will consider it is after it goes to the feds and comes back, it will be the final call of the General Assembly. By final call, I mean chapter and verse, pricing, location, etc. My understanding today is there's not a single Republican vote, even for that kind of proposal, and Representative Devlin is nodding yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is truth to that right now. But, you know, what's interesting is, so the Republicans are constantly criticized that we don't have a plan, when we do have a very detailed, prioritized
I'm sorry,
progress.
if you could just,
But-
but why is that? If even under that circumstances, because all the questions about uncertainties are well taken.
But getting back to that point, there's still uncertainties, and that is to my point. So they're going to dismiss a Republican plan that has specifics, but their own plan has none. And even if we said, we'll send it to the feds for approval, get it back, the legislature approves, there still isn't a plan. And we saw, at the beginning of session, the number of highways have been reduced. All of this is fluid. And so it's very difficult to ask anybody responsibly to vote for something like
But the
that.
Feds say by the nature of the process, there must be uncertainty in the enabling legislation because there's a back and forth with what fits their definitions of VPP, what would be allowed. So, yeah, there are huge questions. But the bottom line is, I mean, you guys want tolls off the table, and you're saying, no.
And we have felt, tolls started under Governor Rell. Her administration had looked at it. And I think to Len's point, back in 2009, we didn't believe that was the right solution for the state of Connecticut. That's how we went into the direction of prioritized progress as an alternative. So for us to retreat and even consider tolls, there really hasn't been put anything on the table that makes that a viable option.
But I think his point is that.
But think about the Connecticut taxpayer. We already pay $500 million in gas tax. We pay $330 million in the petroleum gross excise tax. We pay a car tax. New York doesn't have a car tax. Massachusetts doesn't have the petroleum gross earnings tax. And now we're saying, Connecticut resident, on top of all of those user fees, we want you to come out of pocket on day one of an additional $650 million. The maps that have been shown so far, whether it's 53 or 82, it is a flat-out money grab. No state is told at the density that is being proposed for our state.
Paul, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, perhaps, maybe I'm wrong here, and I know we've heard a bit, but maybe if some legislation was passed to enable a tolling plan, you might have a better idea of what that plan might look like, so that, I mean, we hear people say, well, they don't have a plan, they don't have a plan that works. It seems to me that if you pass a tolling bill, you might have a little more detail.
Well, if you pass the tolling bill the way they want to, there's a fait complete.
There's 3 different versions of it.
Well, I don't know. I think you heard pretty.
Some have come back.
Yeah, but I think you heard pretty clearly from the governor he's going to have one bill, and that bill is going to put it on automatic pilot. That's what he said. Now, I don't know if that means he'll veto any other kind of bill, but he said, no, I'd like this. We could let the bureaucrats, he said the experts, bureaucrats, determine what the price was, and I'm comfortable with that. Now, if that's the role, then I would say that is very disrespectful to taxpayers of the state of Connecticut. If they have the obligation, if they want to go and do a study and they want to come back and say, we refined the traffic patterns, we looked at the avoidance because we're not tolling Route 8, Route 2, Route 9, here's what we really have as real numbers, and then put a plan, then they're entitled to do that and we can have a fair argument. But they're playing in the shadows. And that's what gives me trouble.
How will this end up? The Dems have said in the past, not really today right in front of you, but they've said they have the votes to do tolls. Do you believe that?
No.
No, you don't. Are you predicting that tolls will not happen this session?
I
or
don't know
what
what
is your
will happen,
position?
but I would think as it stands right now, I think it's dubious.
Okay, but you don't think they have the votes right now?
I believe it's dubious. Ask me one more time.
I'm sorry if you got to ask. Is it dubious? Did you address the governor's comments that they're open to some form of securitization process so that some portion of the toll revenue stream presumably would be sold for less than 100 pennies on the dollar to give us the startup capital to build or install the gantries, whatever the word is. Is that a detail? Because that's not something that's going to be worked out with the feds. That's just something that would. Do you anticipate that detail would be in a bill before you had a vote on tolls?
One would think so, that it would be in a bill. And maybe he's thinking about doing a bill later, but that also should play into people's minds because that's, a dollar that Connecticut residents, the other thing, when they say they get 40% from out-of-state residents, what they want to do to get the 40% of out-of-state residents, they want to charge us 60%. They feel these other people aren't paying, so they got to hit us with 60 so they could get 40. That doesn't sound very fair in that realm. But for every dollar Connecticut residents are going to be paying now, not that dollar is going to infrastructure. Someone's going to pay somebody for the leverage of that money. And, I don't know if that works or not, but certainly he was short on details on that as well.
Do you think the securitization is another sign that, as you guys have pointed out last week, I believe in this room or another one like it, that they would take 5 or 7 years, according to DOT's estimates, to get a tolling system approved and up and running?
I know we had a conversation with the federal folks, but every study that they've commissioned and commissioned in 2009 has come out with 5 to 7 years minimum to get the tolls up. Because there's just a process. And that with the SEEP alone is going to take a long time to get through that process. So he could talk to them, but at the end of the day, it's still getting all the things done, getting it approved and putting it through bureaucracy that every expert has said 5 to 7 years, and that's optimal. I think I will say it this way because I don't want to say it the other way. But I would say that 5 to 7 years is if you hit every stepping stone and every measuring rod right on through without a misstep. And I think that's hard to do. Thank you.